A young nurse saved a veteran's life after losing her job. 24 hours later, she received a shocking presidential invite. She had just resumed work that morning. Regina Gates, a nurse with nearly a decade of experience under her belt, walked through the automatic glass doors of the city hospital in New York with her usual calm and purposeful stride. She greeted the receptionist with a polite smile, nodded at a fellow nurse down the hall, and started making her way toward the locker room to change into her scrubs. The coffee in her thermos was still warm, and the day looked like any other, until it wasn't. She never knew that would be her last day in that hospital. She never saw it coming. Regina had barely changed into her scrubs when the ER doors burst open with the force of a storm. A man in his mid-40s was rushed in on a gurney, blood soaking through a makeshift tourniquet wrapped hastily around his leg. Two paramedics barked vitals as they moved swiftly, the urgency in their voices cutting through the usual morning routine. Multiple gunshot wounds to the lower thigh, one of them reported. Vitals unstable. Lost a lot of blood en route. Regina's instincts kicked in immediately. She ran alongside them, asking the questions she needed to know. Name? Conscious? No ID on him. He's semi-responsive. We don't know who he is or how he got shot. The trauma bay was already prepped when they wheeled the man in. Regina snapped on gloves and got to work with the rest of the emergency team. The hospital's attending physician hadn't yet arrived, and the surgeons were tied up in another emergency. The man was deteriorating fast, pulse thready, blood pressure dropping dangerously low. Someone paged Dr. Lennon now, someone yelled. Regina didn't wait. Her eyes scanned the monitors, then the wound. She knew this was bad, real bad. The bullet had lodged itself dangerously close to the femoral artery. If it ruptured, he'd bleed out before help arrived. What's the holdup on surgery? She demanded. They need clearance. There's no record, no ID, and we don't know the source of the injury. We can't proceed without authorization. Regina stared at the man's face, ashen, barely clinging to consciousness. Time was bleeding out of him just as fast as the blood pooling beneath the gurney. Every second they hesitated was another nail in his coffin. Her decision came in a flash. I'm doing it, she said, already grabbing the surgical tray. Regina, no, a fellow nurse warned. You don't have clearance. You'll be risking your license. I'll be risking his life if I don't, she shot back. She moved with focus, her hands steady as she cut open the fabric of his trousers and got to work. She had performed minor trauma surgeries before, under supervision, under orders, but today, she worked alone, guided only by instinct and experience. The operating room was a blur of motion, and yet to her, every action felt precise, deliberate. Clamp, cut, extract, suture. 20 minutes later, the bleeding stopped. The man's vitals had stabilized. He was alive. She had saved him, but the room was silent. No one congratulated her. No one patted her back. Instead, whispers followed her into the hallway. Within the hour, she was summoned upstairs to the director's office. As she walked down the hallway to face hospital administration, Regina tried to convince herself that it would be fine. They'd understand. They'd see the bigger picture. She'd saved a man's life, and isn't that what they were trained to do? But when she stepped inside, the mood was clear, icy, and unforgiving. The director, Mr. Chalmers, sat stiffly behind his desk, flanked by two board members. Papers were already spread out before him, incident reports, internal memos, likely even legal disclaimers. His expression was flat, unreadable. Regina, he said, not unkindly, but not warmly either. You took unauthorized action this morning during a critical incident. Is that correct? I did, she answered calmly. I performed minor surgery on an unregistered patient. The man was losing blood rapidly and would have died if we waited. There was no time to page surgical, and I had the experience to handle it. You acted alone, without clearance, without a documented case, without notifying the hospital authority, he recited, each word like a hammer pounding a coffin shut. Yes, she admitted, but I saved him. Mr. Chalmers sighed deeply. Regina, this isn't about whether or not you saved him. It's about the protocol you ignored. We can't afford legal backlash. We can't have rogue actions, even if they come from someone with good intentions. So following protocol matters more than saving a life, she asked quietly, the words bitter on her tongue. He leaned back in his chair. Intentions don't outweigh liability. The decision was swift. She was dismissed, effective immediately. Regina sat in stunned silence as they slid the termination documents across the desk. Just like that, a decade of commitment and hard work was wiped clean with a single stroke of the pen. No second chances. No appeals. Just a hollow, "Thank you for your service," and a warning not to speak to the press. She packed up her things in silence, her ID badge, her stethoscope, the picture of her sister and niece from her locker. Some of the nurses she passed in the hallway offered sympathetic glances. Others looked away, afraid guilt by association might jeopardize their own jobs. Her hands trembled as she placed her belongings in a canvas tote. Her eyes stayed dry, but her heart felt like it was breaking in slow motion. By the time she walked out the front entrance of the hospital, the same glass doors she had stepped through just hours earlier, she felt like an entirely different person. Her badge no longer beeped. Her name was no longer on the schedule. She had always known the risks of this job, the emotional weight, the legal traps, the thankless hours. But she never thought it would end like this. Regina didn't know where she was going. She just walked. Her feet carried her through midtown traffic and past coffee carts and construction zones. The usual noise of the city, horns, voices, sirens, buzzed around her like static. But she couldn't hear any of it. Not really. Her mind was back in that room. Back in the moment where a man's life hung in the balance and no one had the courage to act. She had acted. She had done what needed to be done. And it cost her everything. She wandered for what felt like hours before ending up in Central Park. The greenery stood in sharp contrast to the concrete chaos of the city. Joggers passed by. Children played in the grass. Couples sat close on benches, whispering to one another. Regina found an empty bench near a cluster of trees and sat down slowly, her canvas tote resting at her feet. She stared ahead, unfocused, watching a squirrel dart across the path. Her body felt heavy, her mind numb. This wasn't just about losing a job. It was losing her identity, her purpose. Nursing was all she had ever known. It was her mission, her calling, the thing that gave her life meaning. Now it was gone. All because she didn't follow a rule. All because she chose to save a man instead of waiting for a signature on a form. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees and cradling her face in her hands. For the first time since that morning, she allowed herself to cry. Not just for what she lost, but for how it all unfolded. The unfairness of it. The betrayal. The sheer absurdity of being punished for doing what was right. "I saved him," she whispered to no one. But the wind offered no answers. Only silence. Regina Gates didn't remember how long she had been walking. The sun had climbed higher in the sky, but to her, it could have been minutes or hours since she left the hospital. The crispness of the morning had begun to soften, giving way to the warming hush of late morning. Yet inside her, there was a cold that wouldn't lift. She clutched her canvas tote close to her side, as if holding on to it might keep her from unraveling. It was all that remained of her time at the hospital. Her stethoscope, her badge, her ID that no longer scanned, and a photo of her niece tucked into a side pocket, the edges curling from years of use. Central Park, always a mix of serenity and motion, felt like another world. Runners passed her by in determined strides, music in their ears. Children chased pigeons with wild laughter. Couples strolled hand in hand, lost in each other. And yet Regina felt utterly alone. Not just alone in the crowd, but left behind by it, as if the world had kept moving while her own life had hit a wall. She wandered down a winding path shaded by tall oaks, their leaves trembling in the slight breeze. The gravel crunched beneath her shoes, steady and rhythmic, like the only sound her heart could follow. The bench she found wasn't much to look at. Worn wood, one armrest slightly cracked, but it was empty, and it faced the wide open lawn, where the sun fell like gold. She sat down slowly, her shoulders slumping, her bones heavy with fatigue that sleep hadn't caused. It was here, in the quiet fold of the park, that reality began to sink in fully. The adrenaline that had kept her going all morning was gone, and what remained was the raw ache of disbelief. She had been a nurse for almost 10 years. 10 years of late nights and early mornings, of holding hands through pain, of telling families the worst news of their lives, of whispering to unconscious patients in the hope that her voice might bring them back. 10 years of giving everything and losing it all in a single morning. She pressed her fingers to her temples and closed her eyes. "Maybe I made a mistake," she whispered to herself. But the voice in her gut, the same voice that had told her to cut into that man's leg and stop the bleeding, whispered right back. "You didn't." That was the thing. Deep down, She knew she hadn't done anything wrong. She had chosen life over liability. She had acted when no one else would. The man would have died had she hesitated. But the system didn't reward initiative. It punished deviation. They didn't care that she saved him. They cared that she didn't ask for permission. She sat with the weight of that truth, watching a little boy toss crumbs to a flock of pigeons, giggling as they pecked at the ground. The innocence of it all made her chest ache. Regina had always believed nursing was more than a job. It was a calling, a promise to protect, to heal, to do no harm. But now that calling had left her stranded. What was she supposed to do now? Her thoughts drifted back to her first year in the hospital. The nerves she'd felt. The way her hands trembled the first time she assisted in surgery. The tears she shed after her first patient died. And the quiet joy of seeing someone walk out of the ICU because she had helped them make it through. Those memories used to make her proud. Now, they felt like photographs from a life that no longer belonged to her. She sighed and leaned back against the bench, letting her gaze drift up to the sky, where sunlight filtered through the branches overhead. A bird landed on the edge of the bench beside her, tilting its head as if curious about her silence. She offered it a sad smile. "I wish I knew what came next," she murmured. The bird chirped once, then took off. It was then she realized how tired she was, not just physically, but emotionally. Losing her job had cut deeper than she expected. It wasn't about the paycheck. It was about identity, purpose, being part of something bigger than herself. And now, all of that was gone. Her phone buzzed in her bag. She pulled it out to see 3 missed calls from her sister and 1 text from a colleague. "I heard what happened. I'm so sorry. You didn't deserve this." Regina locked the screen again and slid the phone back inside. What good were words? They couldn't undo what had already been done. They couldn't give her back what she had lost. She stood and continued walking, unsure of her destination. The park seemed to stretch endlessly before her. She followed a trail that curved near a small pond, where ducks floated lazily and a street musician played a soft jazz tune nearby. Each step felt heavier than the last. As she crossed a footbridge, she paused to look down at the water. Her reflection stared back at her, faint, warped by ripples, the face of a woman in limbo. She touched her chest and felt the subtle thrum of her heartbeat, a reminder that despite everything, she was still here. She just didn't know who she was anymore. Further down the trail, she passed a man sketching in a notepad. 2 teenage girls giggled over their phones. A mother tied her child's shoelace while the boy squirmed impatiently. Life carried on in scenes of quiet simplicity. Regina slowed her pace. A breeze brushed through her hair. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, and laughter answered. The world wasn't cruel, not really, it was just indifferent. People kept living, kept moving, while others like her stopped to catch their breath. As she rounded a bend, the hum of voices and footsteps seemed to fade. The path ahead opened into a wide clearing with fewer people and more trees. There was a calmness here, as if the city's noise had been filtered out by the thick greenery. She spotted another bench beneath a willow tree, its long branches swaying gently like arms in prayer. She walked toward it and sat down, letting the peace of the space settle over her. For the first time since that awful meeting with the hospital director, she allowed herself to fully exhale. To just be. Not a nurse. Not a failure. Just a woman trying to understand what came next. She closed her eyes. In that moment, silence wasn't loneliness. It was a gift. Time passed slowly. A butterfly landed on her knee and fluttered away. She watched it go, thinking how fragile and determined life could be all at once. That's when she heard it. A low, strained wheeze. A cough. Then another. She turned her head, scanning the nearby trail. There, just a few yards away, stood an elderly man gripping a tree for support. His face was contorted in pain. His other hand clutched his chest, his knees beginning to buckle. Without thinking, Regina shot to her feet. Her training kicked in like a switch flipped. She raced across the clearing and reached him just as he collapsed to one knee. "Sir." "Hey, can you hear me?" she asked, supporting him as he crumpled against her. His lips were blue. His breathing was shallow. Sweat poured down his forehead. "Don't try to talk," she said quickly, checking his pulse. It was weak and erratic. Cardiac distress, she thought instantly. This man is in trouble. "Help! Someone call 911, she shouted behind her. A few startled parkgoers looked over and began dialing. She lowered him gently to the ground, positioning him on his back. Her hands moved without hesitation. She tilted his head, opened his airway, and began rescue breaths, counting rhythmically. 1, 2, 3, chest compressions. Pulse check. Breathing. Her world narrowed to this one moment, this one man. Stay with me, she whispered. Don't you give up on me. She kept going until she felt a twitch beneath her fingers, then a rasping breath. His chest rose. His eyes fluttered open. Sirens wailed in the distance. Relief flooded through her like light through stained glass. She had done it again. She had acted. Without a badge. Without a hospital behind her. Just her own 2 hands and her will to save. As the EMTs arrived and took over, one of them looked at her in astonishment. Are you a nurse? Regina hesitated, then nodded. Yes. I was. The EMT blinked. Well, you just saved his life. She watched as they loaded the man onto the stretcher. As they wheeled him away, she saw the military patches on his jacket sleeve faded but clear. A veteran. Highly decorated. Still breathing. Still here. She stood frozen for a moment, not because of what she had done, but because of what it meant. A second chance had arrived not with a job offer, but with a heartbeat. And in the distance, fate was preparing its next move. Because within the next 24 hours, her life would change forever. The morning after the park incident dawned bright and brisk, but Regina Gates hadn't slept. The adrenaline of what had happened the day before still hummed quietly beneath her skin. She had saved a man's life, again, this time in the middle of Central Park, without the support of a hospital, without clearance, without a title. Just instinct and heart. She sat on the edge of her small apartment's couch, half-dressed in sweatpants and a hoodie, sipping lukewarm tea, staring blankly at the muted television screen. Her phone, which had been silent since her dismissal from the hospital, now buzzed on the coffee table with relentless insistence. Missed calls, messages, emails. Something had changed overnight, but she hadn't quite pieced together what. It wasn't until her neighbor banged excitedly on her door that the shift became real. Regina! Regina, turn on Channel 4 right now, the woman yelled through the door. Regina blinked. What? Channel 4. Just do it. Regina grabbed the remote, turned the volume up, and froze. There she was, on the screen. Not a sit-down interview, not a casual mention. No, this was breaking news. A split-screen image showed Regina kneeling in the park next to the elderly man, her hands pressed to his chest, her face taut with focus. A bystander had recorded the entire rescue. And this is the moment that New Yorker Regina Gates, a recently dismissed nurse, sprang into action to save the life of 84-year-old retired Major Thomas Beckett, a decorated war veteran and former advisor to the Pentagon. The anchor's voice narrated. Regina's breath hitched. Thomas Beckett. The name meant nothing to her yesterday. Just a man in distress, gasping for air beneath the willow tree. But now, he was being described as a living legend, someone with medals from 3 wars and personal ties to multiple U.S. presidents. He had been giving a speech at a nearby veterans event when he slipped away to walk alone in the park and collapsed. And she had saved him. The screen now showed an interview with Beckett's daughter, a poised woman in her late 40s. She didn't know who he was. That's the amazing part, she said, her voice thick with emotion. She didn't wait. She just helped. And that's what makes her a hero. Not because he's important, but because he's human. Regina leaned back on the couch, stunned. She had thought yesterday was the worst day of her life. Now, it was turning into something entirely different. She picked up her phone. There were over 100 new notifications. Her inbox was filled with interview requests. Journalists. Bloggers. Morning shows. Local outlets. National networks. Her social media, barely used until now, had exploded. A video of the rescue had been shared over 1 million times. People were calling her the park angel, the unsung hero, the nurse who wouldn't quit. Comments flooded in from strangers across the country. We need more people like you. You didn't need a badge to be a hero. If I'm ever in trouble, I hope someone like you is nearby. Shame on that hospital for firing her. You did the right thing. You saved a life. Regina's hands trembled as she set the phone down. It was surreal. One moment, she had been invisible. The next, the whole city seemed to know her name. And then came the knock at the door. Not her neighbor this time. A different knock, firm, official. She peered through the peephole and blinked. 2 well-dressed men stood outside, wearing suits and earpieces. She hesitated, then opened the door. Miss Regina Gates, the taller one asked. Yes? I'm Agent Walters. This is Agent Mendez. We're with the United States Secret Service. Regina's eyes widened. I think you have the wrong person. We don't, Mendez said with a reassuring smile. We're here on behalf of the President of the United States. He would like to meet you. Regina's mouth parted, but no sound came out. Agent Walters continued, You're being invited to the White House, Miss Gates. Today. The rest of the day unfolded like a dream Regina never dared imagine. Within hours, she was on a government-chartered plane, still trying to process what was happening. A fresh outfit had been provided. A modest but elegant navy blue dress. New shoes. Her curls were styled by a kind-faced woman who spoke little but smiled warmly. As the plane soared above the clouds, Regina stared out the window in disbelief. What is happening to my life? By the time she touched down in Washington, D.C., everything was moving fast. She was met on the tarmac, ushered into a black car, and driven straight to the White House under quiet escort. The gates opened. Security waved her through. The car rolled along the curved driveway as if this were the most natural thing in the world. It wasn't. Not to Regina. She stepped out of the car slowly, her eyes sweeping across the historic columns, the crisp white facade. Her heart thumped loudly in her chest. An aide met her at the entrance and led her through a side hallway to a private reception room. She was told she wouldn't have to wait long. Minutes later, the door opened, and in walked the President of the United States. Regina stood frozen. He crossed the room and extended his hand with a smile. Miss Gates, he said. It's an honor. Regina took his hand, stunned into silence. I've read everything about what happened, he continued. I watched the footage. You saved a man's life when no one else knew what to do. And you did it because it was right, not because of recognition or rules. She finally found her voice. I didn't know who he was. He needed help. And you gave it, the President said firmly. That's what matters. He gestured for her to sit, then surprised her by sitting beside her instead of across. Major Beckett is a personal friend, he said. We've served together. I owe you a great debt. But more importantly, this country owes you its gratitude. Regina blinked rapidly. Sir. I was fired. Just hours before that happened. I know, he said, his expression hardening. And that's exactly why I wanted to speak with you today. He reached into a folder on the table beside him and pulled out a letter. The presidential seal gleamed at the top. This is an official letter of commendation, recognizing your service to the people of this country, both as a nurse and as a citizen, he said, handing it to her. You've reminded us that courage doesn't require a title. She accepted it with shaking hands. And one more thing, he added. He leaned forward. We'd like to offer you a position, right here, as my personal nurse. Regina gasped. Me? He nodded. It's not just a title. It's a role that requires trust, skill, and compassion. Everything you've shown, and more. I don't offer this lightly. But I believe you're exactly the kind of person we need in this administration. And I think it's time your story inspired more than just headlines. Tears sprang to Regina's eyes. I don't know what to say, she whispered. The President smiled. Say yes. That night, back in her hotel suite overlooking the Washington skyline, Regina finally exhaled. Her world had changed in 24 hours. She had gone from being terminated with disgrace to being nationally honored, hired into the most respected institution in the country, and recognized for the very instinct that had gotten her fired. The irony wasn't lost on her. But neither was the lesson. Her story had spread like wildfire, but it wasn't just about virality. It was about impact. About doing the right thing, even when it cost you everything. And trusting that sometimes, the universe would answer back. Her phone buzzed again. It was a message from the daughter of Major Beckett. He's awake. He's asking for you. Regina smiled through tears. It wasn't the uniform that made her a nurse. It wasn't the hospital. It wasn't the badge. It was her heart. And now, the world had finally seen it. The morning sun spilled golden light across the gleaming marble floors of the White House. Washington, D.C. stirred to life outside, but inside those historic walls, time seemed to move more deliberately, as if aware that every step taken within was part of a larger story. Regina Gates stood just beyond the threshold of the East Wing's medical suite, her freshly pressed navy blue uniform hugging her slender frame. On her shoulder was a stitched American flag. Over her heart, a name badge that read Regina Gates, RN, Executive Medical Officer. She could hardly believe it was real. Just 2 weeks ago, she had been standing in the director's office of a city hospital in New York, being terminated for disobeying hospital protocol. Her choice to save a man with bullet wounds, without clearance, had cost her everything. That morning, she had walked out of the only place she'd called home for years, shamed and heartbroken, wondering if all her sacrifices had been for nothing. Now, she was here, in the White House. Not as a guest, not as an observer, but as part of its beating heart. She exhaled deeply, smoothing her hands down the front of her uniform, and took a step forward. The first day had been filled with orientation briefings, medical protocol updates, and tours of the presidential residence's emergency facilities. She had met with the chief physician assigned to the president, who welcomed her with a firm handshake and a respectful nod. "You came highly recommended," he'd said, sliding a folder toward her. And frankly, the president was insistent. That last part still gave her pause. Regina had saved a man in the city park. An elderly veteran clutching his chest, struggling for breath. She had been walking aimlessly, lost in thought after losing her job, when instinct took over. No equipment, no authority, just her knowledge and her hands. She saved his life on pure adrenaline and skill. And it turned out, the man she saved was Major Thomas Beckett, a retired, decorated war hero with friends in high places. What followed was a whirlwind. News stations picked up the story within hours. A nurse, fired that morning, saved a veteran that afternoon. Social media lit up with her name. Interviews were requested, articles were written, and hashtags trended. But nothing could have prepared her for what came next. A black car. A handwritten invitation. A meeting in the Oval Office. The president himself had shaken her hand. "Regina," he'd said with a smile, "the country needs more people like you, people who act, even when the rules say wait. You saved a hero's life. And today, I want to offer you a new beginning." Now here she was. Regina's footsteps echoed lightly down the corridor, past portraits of past presidents and sweeping views of manicured gardens. Staff bustled around her, moving with calm efficiency. Everyone had a place, a role, a duty, and now, so did she. She walked into the medical suite, her eyes scanning the equipment. Pristine, top-of-the-line machines, a crash cart ready to go, a small pharmacy neatly organized by category. A framed portrait of Florence Nightingale hung near the far wall, a quiet tribute to the history of healing. Her team was already present, a physician assistant, 2 nurses, and a technician. They greeted her with warm nods and soft smiles. Respectful, curious. "Morning, Miss Gates," said one of the nurses. Regina smiled. "Good morning. Let's get to work." The hours passed quickly. Her duties included checking the president's schedule to see which high-stress meetings required proximity to medical staff, running a training drill with the team, and reviewing the personal health logs of senior advisors. It was work Regina could handle in her sleep, but this time, it mattered more. It wasn't just a hospital. It was the seat of global decision-making, and her job was to ensure those making history were healthy enough to do so. Later that afternoon, she found herself summoned to the Oval Office once again. She entered with a respectful nod. The president stood behind his desk, reviewing documents. When he saw her, he smiled warmly. "Ah, Regina." Settling in. "I am, sir. Thank you again. I don't really have the words." "You already said the most important ones," he said. "He needs help. That's what you said in the park before you even knew who he was. That's why you're here." She smiled, humbled. He reached behind his desk and pulled out a small box. "I wanted you to have this," he said, handing it to her. Inside was a silver pin, shaped like an eagle in flight. "It's not an official medal, but it's given to civilians who act with honor and service to this country. You didn't just save a man. You inspired a nation." Regina stared at the pin, her hands trembling slightly. She had never imagined recognition like this, certainly not from the highest office in the land. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded. "I think you're going to do great things here." That evening, Regina stood alone in the White House rose garden. The scent of blooming flowers filled the air, and the warm breeze rustled the leaves gently. The soft glow of lanterns lit the cobblestone path beneath her feet. She walked slowly, letting her thoughts catch up with her. She remembered the hallway of the city hospital on her last day, how long it felt, how each step echoed her heartbreak. She remembered how no one stopped her. No farewell hugs, no kind words. But now things had changed. Major Beckett had called her just yesterday to check in. "You know," he said with a chuckle, "some people spend their entire lives waiting for a moment like yours. And you? You just happened to be at the right place at the right time, with the right heart." That stayed with her. Her phone buzzed. A text from her younger sister, Camilla. Saw you on the news again. Still crying. Mom would be proud. Regina felt her throat tighten. She looked up at the stars overhead. Her mother had passed away 3 years ago, a nurse herself. Fierce, compassionate, always reminding Regina that being a nurse wasn't just a job, it was a calling. And now, in a way, Regina was carrying her mother's legacy into the very center of the nation's power. Back inside, she paused by a window overlooking the north lawn. Staff passed her, some in suits, others in uniforms, each locked into their own worlds. But for the first time in her life, Regina didn't feel like a background character. She was part of something greater. A woman who had been discarded by a system now stood inside the heart of that same system, not because she played by the rules, but because she did what was right. And while the halls of the hospital had watched her leave in silence, the walls of the White House now held her name, her story, and her promise to serve. Tomorrow, there would be more challenges, more pressure, more moments where instinct would matter more than protocols. But tonight, Regina allowed herself a rare moment of peace. She had found her place. As she headed back to her quarters, she passed by the wall of presidential portraits again. There, just beside a photo of JFK with his advisors, hung a newly framed article. Nurse saves decorated veteran in New York City Park, a true American hero. Beneath it, a handwritten note from the president. Regina, thank you for reminding us that the heart of this nation still beats strongest in the hands of those who serve without expectation. Tears welled in her eyes. It was the closure she didn't know she needed. She turned the corner into the quiet medical suite, dimmed now for the night, and sat for a moment at her desk. The American flag outside the window waved slowly in the breeze, a symbol of resilience, unity, and in this moment, of her second chance. She took out her journal, opened to a fresh page, and wrote, Day 1. I didn't expect to belong here. But maybe it's not about where you start. Maybe it's about where you decide to rise. She closed the book gently, stood, and turned off the light. Tomorrow, she would rise again. But tonight, under a White House roof, surrounded by the quiet hum of history, Regina Gates allowed herself to feel the full weight and wonder of her new beginning. If you enjoyed this powerful and emotional story of Regina Gates, the brave nurse who risked everything to save a life and ended up walking the halls of the White House, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more inspiring and unforgettable stories like this one. What did you think about Regina's journey? From the day she lost her job at the City Hospital in New York, to the moment she saved Major Thomas Becket in the park, and finally, being honored personally by the president and starting a new life as the White House nurse. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Did the ending surprise you? What would you have done in Regina's place? Also, we'd love to hear from you. Rate this story on a scale of 1 to 10, and let us know where in the world you're watching from. Your feedback means a lot and helps us bring you more stories that move and inspire. Until next time, stay tuned, and remember, sometimes your lowest moment is just the beginning of something greater.